So now, let's talk about the aspect of register beans. How do we register beans? Or more specifically, how do we add objects to our application context? Because as you have seen in the previous lecture, we have built our sample application, we have added some classes, we have added some services, added some DAO, added some controllers, but they are not being registered in the application context. So why is that? First of all, I want you to understand that Spring Boot and Spring works a lot with annotations. Now, annotations are those that will add to a field or to a class or to a method, and at the runtime, it will do some specific logic, some specific behavior, some specific validation based on that specific annotation and how it's being configured. Now, some example annotations that you have in plain Java are the override annotation. For example, when you override a method which you have inherited, this annotation will check on runtime if that method is actually it will check on compile time if that method actually overrides the specific method from your parent class, and if it doesn't, it throws an exception. Now, this way you can create your own custom annotations in Java, and Spring is built a lot around this aspect of annotations. Now, how do we register beans? Well, Spring has an annotation, and it's called component scan, and this annotation has a lot of attributes. Now, attributes are basically these little fellows that you add when you open parentheses and you add the specific attributes with the specific values. Now, Spring has this annotation add component scan, and basically what this annotation will do when you specify this attribute, and by default, if you don't specify the attribute, I will show you what happens. Component scan will look on all the classes from your base package where it's being declared and all of its sub packages, and it will look on all the classes that have the component annotation. And if a specific class has a component annotation, it will add that specific class into the application context. Now, if it doesn't, in the respective package where we have the component scan or sub packages, then it won't be added to our application context. Now, maybe it's a little bit confusing, but we will see right now what Spring does behind the scenes. So I want you to understand we have component scan, and component scan scans and looks on the base package and when you have that component scan and on the sub packages of that. Now, let me talk a little brief about component and we will go to our code. What is the component annotation? Basically, the component annotation, you add it to a specific class. And behind the scenes, when you run the application, Spring will create an object with the singleton pattern. Now, I assume you are familiar with the singleton pattern. If you don't, you can Google it. So basically, singleton pattern will create one object per one instance for that specific class. So there will be only one object in memory, and you can't create multiple objects. But for now, just ignore this, but I just want to tell you right from the start, by default it's a singleton pattern, and it will add that object in the application context where you can reference it later. Now, this annotation, basically an annotation can inherit other annotations and so on, and basically there are a lot of annotations in Spring that inherit the component annotation. Now, what does it mean when it inherits? Basically, it inherits all the properties. So, for example, we have all these annotations. Don't worry it's no need to remember this now because we will work with them. All these annotations in Spring framework inherit the component annotation. So basically, this annotation, when you add this, let's say for example this dot service annotation to a class, basically it will have all the properties of the component plus the specific properties that you have here. So it's basically the same. If you had this at service, it will be added in the application context. Now, enough theory for now. Let's go to our application, and if you see here, let me just restart the application. So if we see here, we have this bin is my first Spring app application, and as you can see here, we have this name. Now this class has been added to the application context. How and why? Well, we have this annotation Spring Boot application. This is one that does all the magic for us. For example, if I type control and click on it, you will see that this application has several annotations, basically these three fellows, that they inherit this Spring Boot application. And the one that we care is this one, component scan. So basically, when you add the .Spring Boot application behind the scenes, you will also add this annotation with these specific attributes. And as you can see here, this component scan doesn't have that scan base packages attributes. But when you don't specify the scan base packages attributes, let me just type here, so component scan, base packages. If you don't specify a base package, if you see here, by default is this empty curly brackets. What does this mean? Basically means that the respective class which you have added the respective component scan, it will take this package and it will look in, let me type here, it will look in COM, in my example, my first Spring app package, and also the sub packages. So for example, if we go here to our controller, you see here we have COM example, my first Spring app controller. So basically this package is a sub package of this, because this is the parent directory and this is the subdirectory, as you see here, because packages are basically just directories, but we call them packages in a Java application. So basically component scan is being added by default with this annotation, and it will look in these packages, in this package, and all the sub packages on which we have created our application. So basically this one, basically everything. And it will look, okay, I have a typo, packages, and it will look on all the classes that have the component annotation. And because person here, person DAO, and person service, and so on, and person service implement don't have the add component annotation, they are not being added to the application context. Now I will just go to the person DAO, and I'm going to put here add component, and let me show you what happens behind the scenes. So I'm going to just start this, and if we search here for person DAO, you will see that it has been added to my application context. And now let me just do something here. Okay, no, it's fine because it's already creating a constructor and it's not going to help. But as you see here, because I have added this component annotation, what Spring does behind the scenes with this component scan annotation has looked in all these packages and sub packages and has found in person DAO. Has found this class with the component annotation, and basically it just added to my application context. Now let's continue this in the next video and learn a little more about how Spring adds this and where does this name come from. So where does this person DAO name come from?